we'll maybe make a start. Can I declare the meeting open and remind members that as the meeting is held in public session, or even if it's in private session, all meetings are recorded and electronic devices, without the exception of the new tablets, or with the exception of the new tablets, interfere with recording equipment, even if they're in silent mode. And can I advise members also to switch off their mobile phones? Today, as members are aware, we are currently in the committee stage of the off-street parking functions of District Council's bill. Members have access to an up-to-date bill folder via the SkyDrive. The committee will receive a number of departmental briefings today, and officials will be here to talk about the provision of water policy papers, the outcome of the water bill consultation, and the blue badge eligibility scheme. Any apologies?
None received, Chair.
Yes, none received. In terms of Chairman's business, myself and the Deputy Chair and the Clerk had met with the Minister ahead of us. I actually had to leave early because of other business in the House, but I did pass my apologies to the Minister for that. But I know the Vice Chair stayed, albeit it was somewhat after the time that was scheduled for it, but he did have the opportunity to get an introduction to the statement before it took place. But as we're all aware, the statement has come to the House members, and I think there's a lot of questions around the statement, and I think for me it strikes me that the Department were aware of this before the summer recess. They initiated an investigation which came to a conclusion at the end of September, and then the Minister came to the House, obviously as we all know then, this week. However, I think that the committee, over and above how the Department have handled this and how the figures are so drastically wrong, I think the committee haven't been handled in the best way practical either. I think we should have been alerted at an earlier stage and prepared for what was coming, and maybe had started our own investigation in terms of that process. So I'm suggesting to members, if they're content, that we actually call the Minister and senior officials for TransLink to brief the committee on the 12th of November. Or if that doesn't suit the Minister, given, and I appreciate the Minister would be very heavily committed in terms of diary commitments, if that doesn't suit, then we call a special meeting with a date that suits the Minister, and we'll try and work around that with the committee. But I don't think we can go forward with a working relationship with the Department in terms of how they've handled this particular piece of business, where we start off with a project of 22 million. And we're all aware that the Executive did give additional money at a time to deliver the City of Culture on time and make sure that the train line was open, or the best service possible was available at that time. However, since then and up until now, I think it's been very badly handled. Before I call Cahill, just also members, whilst the other members are, just want to note there's actually a brief press release to go out in relation to that as well. Cahill.
Thanks, Chair. Chair, I think this is probably one of the most serious situations that we've had in the committee, probably certainly during my time on it. And the second phase of the Corey-Derry line, albeit almost 100% in mine and John's constituency, was critical to the infrastructure development in the north. I appreciate your asking the Department and the Minister to come in front of the committee, but at this stage I think that the committee probably should be considering, on the back of that visit, perhaps conducting an inquiry into the central procurement process within the Department, because this not only is, it also looks as one of the greatest horlickses that has happened in recent times, and it comes on the back, of course, of the Bangor report earlier. So I would hope that the committee would be united in considering an inquiry into this at some point, notwithstanding the presentations from the Minister and the Department.
Okay, John.
Chairperson, thanks for the opportunity. If I could just pick up on what Cahill has talked about most recently. The previous report, and I see you have a copy of it in front of you, that's the Audit Office report into the Belfast Bangor line, which in itself was an absolute catastrophe. Clearly, there were recommendations came out of that report on the back of a Public Accounts Committee report. We need to be asking why the lessons weren't learned, why they clearly didn't learn anything from the mistakes on the Belfast Bangor line, where I think a contract that was to cost 13 million ended up costing over 30 million, and where the accounts were chucked on a skip and the culprits took off to Wicklow on a holiday. That being said, I have to say, Chairperson, my confidence at this stage in both the department and in TransLink is at rock bottom, and nobody has tried harder to work with the Minister and to work with TransLink to ensure that the wishes of the people would have been delivered on. And, you know, just by way of a little history lesson, and I know we were late last night, but that line would not exist today if it had not been for 7 councils covering a whole spectrum of different political opinion coming together and putting together a proposal for the future which ensured that the line still exists. Those 7 councils were supported by huge public opinion, and those people voted with their feet. They used the railway, so it wasn't a case of we want a railway running through our town, but we'll not use it. The Belfast Derry line carries more passengers now than the one from Belfast to Dublin. Now, this is a major setback because the early service, we know, is absolutely critical, and that early service eventually should come down to a half-early service. And it's heartbreaking when you think that the Minister sat on this from early summer, kept his mouth shut and said nothing, and could meet me and smile at me and greet me in the corridors every day, and he knowing fine well that that was real bad news we needed as a committee to know about. I seriously question, in fact I don't question, I know for sure, TransLink may well run suburban trains very well, but they have not a clue how to develop intercity services. And I don't want to make it easy for a finance minister in the future to say he's got no money. But there's a real fear out there in the northwest that they have banjaxed the future upgrade of this railway because of the austerity cuts that we're listening to day and daily. That somebody will say, well, we haven't got the money for it now anyway. So whose heads are going to roll over this? Who is answerable? You know, Chairman, I agree totally with you. Bring in TransLink and talk to them. Bring in the department, although I'm not sure how you're going to get through to the department because they've shown nothing but contempt for this committee. They issue press statements ad lib. They discuss nothing with the committee beforehand. We're not allowed to carry out our scrutiny role. We might as well be Madame Tussauds waxworks. And it's as bad as that. And I'm sorry to have to see that, because I regarded myself as a close friend of Danny Kennedy, and he has let me down so bad, really bad. And, you know, I think whatever inquiry, and I would have Cathy's suggesting an inquiry, I support that, because there's millions of pounds at stake here. You know, and if somebody up in TransLink can just put a blotter on the page and move on, then we're failing in our scrutiny role to make people answerable for what they do, or rather, Chairman, can I say it, what they don't do.
I see what you're saying, and before I call the Deputy Chair, and I suppose one of the things that strikes me as well, and I mean it doesn't bode well for me as being new in this position, in terms of going forward, in terms of that working relationship, in terms of the frank discussions that the Department should be having with us, and the honesty they should be having, and then on back of the PAC report that has been cited. And you know, John, both I and yourself and myself, and even indeed I think Ross sits on the PAC. I think even whenever we're finished with our piece of work here, I think we should be sending it back to the PAC maybe to have another look at it, because as has been said many times in rehearsal with the Public Accounts Committee, we do criticise all departments, not one department, all departments where lessons are not learned. And here is a fairly recent report in terms of the railway line, and here we have this debacle again. And I think the handling of that, and I'm not entirely convinced that the department will be as entirely honest and frank as it should be with us. So for that reason, but I mean, I'll wait in terms of what we should decide in terms of going forward on that. once, if the members decide to have an inquiry, whether we should actually ask the PAC to look at it also. Sean?
Thanks, Chair. To come in on what Cathal has said, and I think this, our role is a scrutiny role, and I think we wouldn't be taking our responsibility, I think, at all serious if we didn't scrutinise this. And we would come in for criticism, and I know, Chair, you were on one morning yourself, and people's going to ask us, what are we doing? We're toothless in this. And I don't think we should pass it on to the PAC this time. I think we listen to the Minister, we listen to the officials, but certainly we have to take this very seriously. And I would back what Cathal has said. I know it's in his constituency, it's a long bit from where we are, but this was a major miscalculation, because the Minister said he was disappointed, but that was an understatement. And also, this was on gestation. You know, in this day and age, with the finances being fairly tight, I think it's not good enough. I think that this committee needs to take what John says. We do have a scrutiny role, and we do need to look at what terms of reference and seriously look at an inquiry into the central procurement.
Okay, thank you. Ross?
Chairman, can I begin by agreeing with nearly everything that John has said. I mean, I accept fully that someone from that constituency and someone who's put as much into the railway as the likes of John is extremely disappointed with us. And we in the Public Accounts Committee, yes, I am a member of the Public Accounts Committee, have in the past criticised people for working out calculations on what appeared to be in the back of a fag packet. And we have made it very, very clear that we weren't happy about that, and we continue to do so. The Minister has expressed his disappointment, and this is well Mr McNary is not here, because I would again be accused of yes Minister, and obviously I am supported by the Minister, but there has been something really went wrong here, and went badly wrong here. I find it difficult with the letter where the Minister is accused of various bits and pieces, but however, statement is going to go out and there's going to be a criticism of the Minister and the Department. I do believe it's right that we have the Minister and officials here, and I do believe it's right that they explain to us how this happened. It is the fag packet scenario yet again, and I said total hash. I could think of other words to use. This is a total hash. It's an extreme disappointment whenever we do see that we were trying to build a proper railway network. In my part of the world, it doesn't concern me at all. We don't have a railway in West Tyrone. In fact, people can say we don't even have roads in West Tyrone. I agree entirely that this process is wrong. And there's criticism here of the Minister, which I don't want to see until we bring him here. And if the Minister is wrong, well and good.
Well, I mean, just to pick up on a couple of points that, I mean, the criticisms will be levelled at the Minister, because the Minister is ultimately responsible for the Department. And the Minister instigated a review just before summer recess. This committee was not informed. I mean, the Vice Chair was right, or Deputy Chair was right. I was on the radio this week because I was actually asked to go on the Radio Foyle, and I was asked on Radio Ulster. And the presenters in both those programmes were very quickly trying to turn this to a committee problem as if it was our fault. And what are we going to do? Well, the very fact that we didn't know, or weren't being told, or weren't being informed, and the Minister was doing a solo run, and the Minister was coming out making statements about one-go loans, and the Minister was talking about savage cuts, when his department has bungled another £20 million in terms of this particular project. He is the Minister.
With all due respect, that is obviously politics we're playing here at the minute.
No, it's not politics. No, I'm in the chair. It's not politics. The fact is, the Minister is on record with some of the statements. Sorry, let me finish. The Minister is on record with the statements. He talked about the 100 million Wonga loan. There's two projects over this summer that we've learned in terms of the Minister, and the way this Wonga loan's going, it'll take nearly everything that the Minister has wasted. Would nearly cover half of this amount of money that had to be, additional money that had to be borrowed. And if that hadn't happened, maybe we wouldn't be in the mess we are as well.
But as I say, let me finish, Chair. Again, the Minister will be here, I hope, and will be held accountable.
Absolutely.
And he is the man.
He is the man. He is the Minister, and he will be held accountable. John Byrne.
Yes, Chairman. Obviously, this is a major disappointment, but it's symptomatic of the way government procurement generally applies in Northern Ireland. And I'm on other committees as well, but we're coming up against the same lack of proper information. Nobody's heads rolls around here when they make a mistake. There's too much covering up the law. And I would support those that want to have a sharp inquiry of this within the committee. Obviously, a minister is ultimately accountable, and until I hear his story in relation to his officials, then I'll have an open mind on him. But he is ultimately responsible. I was on the Public Accounts Committee when we reviewed the whole Bangor-Belfast line as well, and it was quite simply shameful what happened. And lessons haven't been learnt within this department. And it begs the question, who is the head of this department? Who is the head of the civil service? There's no civil servant's head ever rolled when they make a gross mistake that costs so much public money. They seem to be a protected species. And I think there are too many ministers in all parties that kowtow to the system for the civil service as they did in the show. Thanks, Chairman.
Well, I mean, our responsibility today obviously to deal with the RD, and I take the point. I mean, because of the work we've done in PAC, we've seen it in other departments, but we're here to talk about DRD today. And just so a member's content in terms of, and we go ahead in terms of the proposal from Cahill in terms of an inquiry.
Yeah.
And then we'll get maybe terms of reference for the next meeting.
Yeah.
Okay. Are members content with the release of the press statement?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Chair, before you move on, in terms of terms of reference, do we not give some guidance to the clerk on this? Because I think it needs to be, and I think Joe mentioned it, doesn't need to be widespread. I think it needs to be fairly focused on the procurement and the processes rather than having a long drawn out one.
Sorry, before you come in, I suppose, I mean, and I would be concerned that we just focus primarily from summer recess. I think we need to actually get back to this first phase of this particular project.
Absolutely.
Because one of the things, and it's been said a number of times in here, to me it doesn't matter whether it's the Coleraine to London Dairy line or any other line. The very fact, so whether it's my constituency or someone else's, it doesn't actually matter. It's how the whole thing has been handled from day one up until today.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter what part of the constituency. We may even get to an instance where Ross will get a railway line in West Run. You know, I don't know.
Chair, I'm just checking, to use my terms, we're going back to when the fag packet first had ink written on it. We're going to go back to the very start of this process, and I'm more than happy to support that.
But now the Minister did say in his introduction, he talked about his disappointment even at an earlier stage. I would suggest someone within the department has taken their eye off the ball. So we need to get from the very start of the process to the very end of the process and not starting just with this particular debacle has started.
Chairman, I think the inquiry is fine, but the Minister did say, and pardon the pun, he hoped to get this project back on track in a short period of time. That's in his statement. So we need to be asking, first of all, how he proposes to get the project back on track. And we also need to know, and probably this requires an executive decision, how they intend to ring fence the money that was needed for the phase 2 upgrade. You know, the inquiry is one thing, that will tell us about past history, and I support that. But more critical than that is, how is the Minister for the second time round going to get this back on track? And how is he going to secure the money from the executive which will pay for it?
Well, I mean, I think those questions we can write separately in terms of those questions, because, I mean, whether it actually goes ahead or not is a question. There is a question mark in terms of if additional money is going to be found, an additional 20 million. But I think in the terms of the carrying out this piece of work first, but there's nothing to prevent us actually asking the questions. I mean, taking his words, how he's going to take us forward, how he's going to find additional 20 million. Because, John, and I know it's in your constituency and you want to protect it, but there's been, and on my number of weeks here, we've had presentations in terms of where soft-touch departments have been, money's been taken out of their budgets. So it's going to be interesting how Mr Kennedy or Minister Kennedy is going to find another 20 million to actually deliver this project.
Chairman, I think you probably, I'm sure you're following me. This was a project that by this stage should have been completed.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be competing with other demands that are arising now. So we need to know from the executive through Danny Kennedy, how is this the money for this going to be ring-fenced? I think that's critical, because in the Northwest, this is probably the third transport project that's been hit over the head. One rail, two road. And there's a lot of people out there who are now saying, hey, come off it. Is there nothing going west of the ban at all?
Well, that's right. Let the clerk speak now.
Just on 2 points that members have raised with regard to Mr Dallett's concerns. Members may well remember that whenever the second phase was originally delayed this time, in around this time last year, the Minister did say that the budget would be ring-fenced for the 2014-2015 period. Members will be aware, obviously, that a new draft budget is currently out to consultation for 2015-2016. We will be writing to the department to see whether the existing budget will be carried forward into the new draft budget, ministerial budget.
Chairperson, that's absolutely critical.
Chair, the timing, as the Deputy Chair said, the timing is absolutely critical. And we are well over the time that this phase 2 should have been finished. I have asked those questions in the past, what the delay was, why we weren't moving on. I know that John referred to the roads projects, the one that the public inquiry finished 2 years ago, last month actually, and we're still waiting on a report on that. So there's a number of other issues, but this one I think should be absolutely focused. And the other thing is that we need to know what the time, and I asked the Minister this on Monday and I asked it on the radio yesterday, what the time frame now for delivery is, because we don't know that. And if we have an open end thing here, the Minister did throw the spanner in the works when he said that suppliers might not even have the confidence now to actually tender for any new procurement process. So we've all that to contend with as well.
Just with regards to the focus on the inquiry, I'm content to bring terms of reference to the next meeting. I would want to be looking to see, because the procurement process is a very technical process, potentially the possibility of getting a special advisor into with expertise in respect of that. I also want to make use of our own researchers in respect of how the estimate process was actually carried out as well. So we need to sort of make sure that we can gather those resources as well. But we'll bring that next week to the next meeting.
Okay, members, just following on from that, then the Chair, myself and the Deputy Chair met members of the Unite Union on the 4th regarding issues around public transport. I suppose it was the wide issues around in terms of how the service is run and the different aspects of it. But maybe, and I missed the start of the meeting, but maybe the Deputy Chair wants to give a summary, maybe, for you there for the start.
Well, one of the biggest concerns they had was the loss of school runs to private contractors, and their particular concerns were around these private contractors hadn't got the same safety standards as TransLink have and are supposed to have to bring children to school, etc. So they're very, although we said that some of that was outside our remit, some of it's to do with DOE, the safety on buses, etc., etc. And obviously, it's just got to do with, is it the boards in terms of the contracts around the transport of children. So that was one of their big concerns. We actually directed them towards the other committees. I think they have a meeting with the Minister, the Environment Minister.
Yes, I think it was, yeah.
Yeah, so that was one of the big concerns that they raised with us. I don't have my notes in front of me, Chair, but that's the one I remember.
Yeah, well, that was one of the ones, and we did talked about it. It was cross-departmental, and we did guide them in that particular direction. Ross, you want in there?
I want to put in there, the buses issue, I do believe is maybe more to the boards, because again, I think in the Western Board, where we had concerns that large buses would perhaps go on half full, they've looked at their fleet management and they're using smaller buses, and they're trying not to use contractors. So it is a multidisciplinary grouping. Yes, I accept TransLink is there, but the boards are very much involved as well. And I think that what they're doing is the boards are trying to cut the number of buses being used, or stop the bigger buses being used in smaller routes, to cut out the contract.
I think, to be fair, they used an opportunity. I mean, one of the other discussions was about the bus lanes, and they did talk about enforcement, and we did reassure them in terms of enforcement's been looked at proactively at the moment. I think, to be fair to them, they were supportive of that. They just took an opportunity to raise the different methods that's used for school transport, but they were already aware in terms of other committees involved in that, and they were going to build their meetings in relation to that. Right, members, we're moving on, but just before I move on, can I welcome Sylvia Merlick, who's on work experience here this week, and you're very welcome, Sylvia, to our meeting here today. Agenda item number 3, members, the draft minutes on the 22nd of October. Can I refer members to page 6 for the minutes of the committee meeting on the 22nd, and ask members if they approve. Members agreed?
Yep.
Okay. Agenda item number 4 is correspondence. I refer members to page 12 in the main pack and page 2 in their table papers. And unless there's any objections or issues to raise, those that's marked with the approach of to note will simply be noted. So I'll ask the clerk maybe if he wants to go through some of those. Just a minute.
Item number 1 is correspondence from the Minister regarding the oral statement on the Coleraine to Londonderry rail track. Members will also see a copy of the statement in table papers. Item 2 is from the Committee for Enterprise, Trade and Investment regarding the Northern Ireland Economic Strategy. Item 3 is from the Committee for Employment and Learning regarding the inquiry into post-special educational need provision in education, employment and training for those with learning disabilities. Item 5 is holding correspondence from the Department regarding the committee queries on the strategic drainage infrastructure and the risk of infraction. In table papers, there's correspondence from the Department regarding presentations from the Changing Gear bicycle seminar. There's also correspondence from the Central Committee Office informing the committee that members' attendance figures will be published on the Assembly website on the 7th of November 2014.
Okay, members, are the members content to note the items marked accordingly?
Yeah.
Great, okay. Are members content to write to the Department regarding the Committee for Employment and Learning to request that the relevant official is made available to attend the roundtable discussion on transport?
Yeah.
Okay. Right, members, agenda item number 5 is the off-street parking functions of District Council's bill. Can I refer members to their bill folder? Inform members that the closing date for the written submissions for the committee's consultation was Friday the 31st of October, and at present the committee has received 6 written submissions. Well, there's from 6 different organisations. I don't know if the members have got.
They're in the bill folder.
Yeah, so it's in the folder, so no point in me reading it into record again in terms of who they are.
Chairperson, is that not a very poor response from 26 councils, only 4?
It'll be 11 councils, 4.
Are these the new ones?
Yeah.
Yeah, they are.
Well, then 4 out of 11 is not very representative of the impact that this particular bill would have on people in the future.
There's 5 there, John, but yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Just to advise members, we did write to, we have copies of all the council correspondence as part of the departmental consultation. We wrote to the council specifically putting any queries that they had raised in that, the consultation, asking that if they had anything additional to add, they could write to us. So it was very, very specific in respect of what we asked from the councils.
And Chairman, in the original submissions that were received, I think there was 18, but it included Nilga. I noticed Nilga isn't in this one. Should we seek their collective?
Nilga has responded.
Okay. Yeah, sorry.
So, are the members content? And actually, in terms of we have a list. In terms of your pack, you'll have a list of those who did respond. Are members content that we actually invite some of these for an oral evidence session to the committee? Or indeed, if there's any others, add it. And notice that in terms of those who had responded, Gavin's keeping me right here, but I think he said that Nilga was going to try and capture some of the councils. But I noticed, and I'm not being parochial members, but Andrew Minute Nobby has been dropped off. whereas Belfast Council stand on its own right. So is any other members interested in any of the particular councils who did respond to be all invited, or?
What I find interesting looking at this is that when you look to the west, again obviously coming from the west, but when we take Londonderry, Omagh, Strabane and Fermanagh, there's been no further comment from them. You know, except this is a further response. There's been no further response from that part of the world. No, there were initial responses, I accept. This is it. The committee has received 4 written submissions. This is further ones.
These are additional?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you're not getting my point. They submitted their original comments. Is that correct? This is additional comments.
This was the committee writing to them for additional comments?
Yes, this is the point I'm making. There were no further comments from that area.
Sorry, can we just say the Omagh and Fermanagh did respond, but they were late in the response, which is why maybe they're not listed on the cover note that's in members' packs.
We have that ish time in Tyrone for Fermanagh. That probably would be the reason.
Chair, where can we get copies of those responses?
They're all in a build folder on your SkyDrive.
How do you access the bill folder? I can speak to you after.
Yeah, I can certainly speak to you after the meeting.
But Chairman, I think, yes, we should hear orally from some of these organisations to hear exactly what their issues are.
I mean, rather than, I suppose because members have different views on this, and in this, the suggestion here is there's 5. There's Nilga, Belfast City Council, Nyarta, Fermanagh and Omagh District Council, and of course the department themselves. Would members, and I mean, it may make it a slightly longer day for us, but because there's different opinions from different councils, rather than Nilga speaking for everyone, those who did take time to, given there is only 11 councils, do we want to, those who have corresponded back to us, should we not actually invite them all? Now, they may not take us up on the offer and they may be content that Nilga will deal with that, but I think that because members have different fears in terms of this going forward. Is that, that's okay, that's all right, okay. So that session, the evidence sessions to take place on, our sessions rather, will take place on November the 12th, the 19th and the 26th, with the possibility of 2 of those meetings being external. I think the reason for that is because of the building works here. If they run into a long period of time, there's pressure in these rooms on a Wednesday because of the problems here on a Thursday. Some of the committees have been squeezed their meetings in on a Wednesday because of the building works.
It's my chair. Omagh would be a very nice venue, I think. Lovely place to visit.
Well, if you can get a good road down there, we could maybe go down there sometime.
I think you should travel the road till you see what it's like to get down to God's County. And I'm sure
I leave in the
Bernard
way
will
for
support me.
Okay. Right, members, so we'll write to them all, but bear in mind those dates and the possibility that we will have to leave this building for some of those meetings, but the committee staff will keep us well informed beforehand. Agenda item number 6, a departmental briefing on the provision of the water policies paper. It's on page 204 in the members' packs. I was going to welcome John, but he's maybe a bit like his papers. He's maybe running late. John, we're just noting there in your absence, we're moving on to the provision of papers, and thought maybe you were stuck with the papers, that you were running late there getting in. So it was nice to see you've arrived. And if you want to make a presentation in relation to that, John, the floor is yours.
Yes, Chair. I'll deal first with the issue about the late arrival of papers.
Okay.
Fair enough.
That's what
You asked us to deal with that. First of all, I just want to make the point that the Department and the Minister are committed to provide the committee with as good a service as possible. There is a consistent and regular traffic between the committee and the Department on a continuing basis, and as far as I can understand, the vast majority of papers arrive within the sort of desired timetable. So what we're talking about, there's been three sets of papers in recent times. Those 3 sets are the exception to the rule. I need to say. They have been all around water. They've been around substantive issues, where in 2 cases the volume of the papers themselves, in one case it was 180 pages, the other was 115 pages. Obviously, these have to be cleared by the Minister on each occasion. The Minister has fairly hectic diary, like all his colleagues in the Executive, and on some occasions he just simply can't get sufficient time to prioritise these to get them within the timetable. One of the occasions there involved an unexpected disruption to the Minister's own personal timetable, which was unexpected, unavoidable, and it led to the papers arriving on the Friday rather than the Thursday, so they were not excessively late. We do our best. We will continue to do our best to service the committee, but we do work in uncertain times. The Minister has a hectic timetable. I think it is, I'll be honest in saying, it's not surprising that there may be some occasions, very few, but some when papers might be late, and I could not promise that there won't be times in the future when the same might happen. We do our best. We will continue to do our best endeavours. I know the Minister is committed to working closely with the committee, but in the pressures that the Minister faces, which will, and we all face, which will get worse in the future with staffing cuts, it is possible that this may recur.
Well, I suppose, John, the thing that would disappoint me, we're doing particular pieces of work. We're not, and I appreciate the difficulties your Minister has and other ministers has in terms of pressures.
Yep.
However, we've been challenged to assist the department in respect of some of this work as well. So where we're asking for papers back, we're not actually asking them for back next day. We're given reasonable times.
Yep.
So to overrun is actually making our work, and I suppose we could be suggested of holding up the department in terms of, I mean, if we take, for example, the most recent one we're doing in terms of the off-street car parking. If the papers don't come in a timely manner, the Minister had suggested going to actually accelerated passage. We don't really want an accelerated passage. We're content to try and work within 30 days. But if the Minister and the officials can't return papers, just using that as an example, they can't return them in time, then they're forcing our hand into a situation where we're going to overrun. And then, of course, the criticisms will be levelled at the committee, which none of us in this committee want the criticisms levelled at us, because we're trying our utmost to get this done in the time that's given to try and get this transferred, if that is the will of the Assembly. But in terms of the clearing process, maybe you could actually tell us what the process of actually clearing the papers are, and how long, or I mean, talk us through that process, John. Because, I mean, it's difficult to comprehend that the ministers all are generally in this building on a Monday and Tuesday, and most of them find time to be in the chamber for various debates. So I'm curious that if there's pressing papers that the department can't grab a minister for a few moments to get them to sign those off, given that we are talking about a small number, but they are pressing times for us to move those forward.
Sure. I'll first just touch on the point you started off there. I mean, I fully recognise, and a lot of the business that transacts between the committee is at the department's behest and the Minister's behest, and therefore, if we are late, that in a sense works itself back to us and the Minister. So I fully take that point and accept that. Papers for the committee are, in one sense, like every paper for the Minister. They will be worked up, they will be processed by officials, and they will be passed to the Minister for his consideration and clearance. In that sense, they will be set up in time for the Minister to deal with, but that does not take account of the wider volume of business the Minister will have from across the department. And they will go into his box, they will be looked at by the Special Advisor, and they will work their way through to the Minister. It is difficult for us, and we will point out on all occasions what the desired timetable for clearance with the committee is, and frequently papers will go to the Minister in what might look like ample time, but that does not take account of the Minister's own prioritisations, unexpected issues arising, and timetabling both in this building and elsewhere. And when it comes back out, I know the Minister attaches particular importance to committee paperwork, but on some occasions it might just happen, and in 2 of the occasions here, that it's just not met the sort of Thursday deadline.
I suppose, John, where I'm at, and I mean, I don't want, and others may think different, I don't want to get into a situation where it's myself versus the Minister every day. We set up a process here in terms of, which was agreed with the department in terms of a 10-day turnaround for papers. Nor do I want to do the minister's job in terms of challenging his department, in terms of getting him the papers in a timely manner. So maybe if we take one of those examples, and I'm sure you will have the time frames, how long does it take the department working up those papers on that 10-day time frame to deliver them to the minister? Or is it the department's escaping the blame here rather than, and I don't want to be blaming the minister continually here, but is the minister getting a very small time frame to actually sign off the papers, and is the delay actually in the department? But I think that's something the minister should be chasing himself if that is the case.
Obviously, Chair, we would endeavour to, as in every issue we have, to give the minister as much time as he needs to consider that. And I'm a great believer in always ensuring that officials don't maximise the time they have and minimise the time for ministers. Ministers, if you have very constrained timetables, they don't have an awful lot of time to deal with issues, but you cannot expect, and I certainly commend to colleagues, you cannot expect ministers to turn around stuff in a day when they have stuff, and that's their responsibility to
I appreciate that, John. Let's take the one that you talked about that was only a day late. I'm sure you would have done your work before you came today, and I'm sure you'll have the time frames on the process of that before you came, because I'm sure you would have been expected to be asked on some of those. So maybe you could talk us through, so when the department worked it up, and at what stage in the 10 days did the minister actually get those papers?
The issues, the ones that were up on the Friday was the drainage infrastructure. On that occasion, without going into detail, there was unexpected disruption to the minister's timetable.
I think maybe it would be useful if we go into detail, because this
Well,
has
this
been
is-
sorry, John, if I finish, this has been an ongoing feature. What we're trying to do is build up a relationship with the department where we get papers in a timely manner so as we can do our job. So we can take this one instance from the request was received and talk us through the process, who had it, when, and why it took so long.
The briefing that was scheduled for the 17th of September. The briefing was provided within the department, sent up on the 4th of September. There were some queries raised, as is the norm frequently, by the Special Advisor on the same day. The queries were addressed and reissued back on the 5th of September. Some further amendments were made by the Special Advisor on the 11th of September, and the briefing was cleared on the 12th eventually, which was the Thursday evening, and sent up to the clerk on the 12th.
And the deadline for that one was when, sorry?
It was due on the 11th and it was received here on the 12th.
Okay. So if you could take another one, take me through another one, John.
The long-term water strategy, which comprised 180 pages of briefing in total, was sent up on the 23rd of May. There were queries raised by the advisor again on the 2nd of June. They were addressed the same day. The briefing was cleared on...
Sorry, just start again. So you received it on the 23rd of May? You said?
We submitted it to the private office on the 23rd of May.
So it took from the 23rd of May to the 2nd of June?
Yes, on that occasion, yes.
Okay. Go ahead.
The 2nd of June, those queries were addressed the same day on the 2nd of June. The briefing was cleared then by the Minister on the 4th of June. And subsequently discussed in the committee here on the 18th.
Okay, maybe I call on the Deputy Chair.
No, it's just an observation I want to make, John. I sit on the Justice Committee, which a huge volume of papers go through it. Anytime there's less than 1,000 pages, we think we're lucky in the Justice because of the huge volume. And never seems to be a problem with papers, so I no doubt that the Minister of Justice would say that he's equally as busy. It's an observation I'm just making. So there's never a problem with the papers in the Justice Committee.
Well, I can't but I would, you know,
I know you can't.
I know consideration, but I invite all ministers busy, and I'm quite sure they're pretty voluminous in justice. But I have made the point, these are the exceptions to the rule. There's 2 or 3 issues here. And in one instance, there was a particular issue in terms of the minister himself on disrupted his timetable, which I think was Clark was made aware of, which had exceptional circumstances.
I'm just going back to, obviously it was before my time, John, but
Yep.
the clerks make me aware here on notes. That strategic drainage one, the department indicated on the 31st of July that they were ready to go. And that's the one we didn't actually receive until the 17th of September.
The strategic drainage.
You asked for the department actually asked to make a presentation.
Yes.
The request was made on the 31st of July. So you actually asked, the department asked the committee to make a presentation on the 31st of July, but the papers weren't made ready until the 17th of September.
Yes.
Well, I'm sorry, if I can just interject at this stage. Certainly, we were in a position to come and brief the committee, and we're happy to do that. We really appreciated the opportunity to speak to the committee about the importance of the strategic drainage infrastructure. Having said that, there were still a lot of papers to gather together and to be agreed and to be prepared. Now, I think the papers were still provided within the fortnight before the committee meeting,
Louise, can
or
I just
just
stop you?
short of that.
Right, can I just stop you? The request from the department was on the 31st of July, where the department indicated that they were ready to make a presentation. So the department ready on the 31st of July. Why would they be looking for papers that weren't ready until the 17th of September?
Well, I think it was scheduled for the 17th of September, Chair.
No, sorry, the request was made on the 31st of July, John, and if Louise seems to be across this particular one, so we'll let Louise answer this one.
Yes, certainly we were very keen to brief the committee at an early stage within the new session of the committee. As you'll appreciate, there are papers that have to be prepared. It's a very significant project. We wanted to get everything ready, and certainly those papers were provided on, pardon me, on the 4th of September, which I do believe is
No,
within
sorry, they
the
weren't.
timescale.
They were sent back to the special advisor on the 4th of September. So the committee hadn't got them.
Sorry, they were provided to our private office on the 4th of
Yes.
September, which would have allowed the normal 2-week turnaround to give a week, say, with the Minister for his consideration, and then a week in advance to yourselves.
My problem here, John, is the scheduling of the meeting was requested by the department, which would indicate the department were ready. And it's clear the department weren't ready.
Well, Chair, I think it's important to understand, I mean, all my colleagues will have a range of things to be done. If it turns out we've asked and welcomed the opportunity to talk to the committee, and that was scheduled for the 17th of September, other things will have intervened to occupy the senior officials' time. In the meantime, the briefing was set up in specific time to get to the committee within the deadline. It was only arrived 1 day late, or the morning after, because of particular circumstances which delayed the minister. We have to prioritise our work all the time. If something's not going to come up for several weeks, something else will come in the meantime.
Well, maybe you shouldn't ask for meetings, John, until you're ready for those, because the committee staff have to prioritise their work as well. So if the papers arrive late, then the members don't actually have them in time for
Well,
our piece of work as well. So, because believe it or not, we do read some of the stuff the department's saying, and we need to have.
I'm actually confident you read all of it.
Yeah, and we have to have it in time. And
Sure,
our committee staff have to have time to process that
Sure,
as well.
I'll
I'll call John.
Chairman, I'm trying to get my head around something simple and not complicated for you. But I'm glad you don't publish a daily newspaper or even a weekly one. I mean, can you seriously come here in front of a statutory scrutiny committee and tell us, well, there's times you won't have the papers ready, so what? I mean, is there not some truth in the myth that come June, it's shut down, it's holiday time, everybody goes off, skeleton staffs, nothing happens? I mean, John, seriously, is this the way to treat a committee?
Mr. Donnell, I've made clear we are committed, and our record, I think, shows it, so we're inclusive with the committee, submitting our papers on time. I would have said there have been 3 occasions here, and one was due to particular unexpected disruption of the Minister's timetable, and the other 2 were voluminous sets of papers which were delayed. This simply reflects the hectic nature of the business we work in and the pressures on a minister. It is not intended as any disrespect towards the committee whatsoever. I'm not sure the basis of your remarks about what happens in June or whatever, but our department works flat out 12 months a year. While the Assembly may not be sitting over the summer period, that doesn't mean that work drops significantly in any way at all. The same way when I previously worked in the Department of Education, the education system closed down for the summer, but the work didn't stop.
Chairperson, and this is my last question. I'm trying to get my head around where does the committee sit in terms of the pecking order for your priorities? And you keep telling us about the Minister, and we understand that. Minister is very important, ministerial guard, big briefcase, all that. That's very important, and we know that. But where do we rate after him? Where does this committee rate in terms of your priorities for delivering papers and for servicing this committee and putting to an end this nonsense where we have to read in the newspapers what's going on in the department rather than hear about it?
I'm not sure what you're referring to, that last element. But, I mean, the department works under the direction and control of the Minister. We process all requests, both requests from the committee and work we have asked the committee to look at, in line with the timetables that are desired.
So it's his fault then?
No, I'm not saying it's his fault. I'm saying that we have a very busy system. The Minister aims to prioritise everything. He has disruptions to his timetable. We have disruptions as a result sometimes of the Ministers. We do our best. At the end of the day, we work under the direction and control of the Minister and take account of his priorities.
Chairman, it's very clear to me now we're shooting the messenger. It's the Minister we need these questions to.
Chris?
Thanks, Chair. Obviously, a few of us sit on a number of different committees, and it would appear that delay in the delivery of papers is potentially an issue across a number of committees. Perhaps it's something that we could refer to the Procedures Committee. I know the Procedures Committee has previously looked into delayed response to ministerial questions, so perhaps that's something they could look at. And far be it for me to perform Ross's role in defending the Minister, but this
sounds like it.
This scale of delay is relatively minor to some of the scales of delay that I have experienced on other committees. It's not to diminish the significance of this particular delay in any way whatsoever, but it might be something that a bird's eye view from Procedures Committee across all of the committees might be a useful exercise to undertake.
Well, of course, it'll be within our remit to refer it to procedures, but in terms of DRD. But just for your own information, Chris, there's been 3 briefings had to be cancelled in the last 6 months.
Obviously, new to the committee, Chair. So,
I appreciate you wouldn't have that knowledge,
yeah.
but so 3 briefings cancelled because the department had failed to have papers here in a timely manner.
I understand that, yeah.
And in terms of the committee workload, whilst I wouldn't want John thinking just whenever we leave here this afternoon that our work finishes either. We are busy as well, John, and we have work to do in other places. But to cancel 3 briefings where we could have other work done, I don't think is an acceptable way forward. But the other one, I suppose, and maybe you will have note of this one, and it's made the media this week, where the department would have been aware, and we've never cited papers, but just to inform you, the committee are going to do an inquiry into it, is the Coleraine to London Dairy line, where the department were aware before the summer recess, before, as John said, the shutters were pulled down, that there was a problem in relation to that. And I have to say, it's disappointing that the department never made this committee aware.
Appalling.
Because whenever the media ask us questions on it, they believe that we are supposed to hold the department to account. However, we weren't made aware of the situation until the Minister made the statement in the House this week. So maybe you would just bear that one in mind as well, that maybe not necessarily papers that we're requesting, but there's also other information that you should provide us in a timely manner so as that we're prepared for what happens. And I think it's very disappointing how the department have handled that.
Well, Chair, I will make the point that the seriousness of the issue was highlighted by the Minister in his statement the other day. He indicated that's the way he wanted to handle the issue and bring it to the Assembly in the first place, the seriousness of the issue and his disappointment about it. I'm not sure what else he could have done in that circumstance.
Well, do you want me to tell you what he could have done? He could have come to this committee. That's what he could have done. Before making a briefing to the Chair and Deputy Chair 10 minutes before he went to the House. He could have came to us, or he could have called this committee back before the summer, before he instigated another piece of work.
Correct.
I'll tell you something else he could have done, John. He could release us the detail of the findings, which he's refusing to release, in terms of that piece of work. So there's some of the things the Minister could have done, but has failed to do. We'll move on. Members, can refer members to page 209 of the packs, and John's staying with us along with Louise and Eilish as well. Sorry for that pronunciation. And just remind members again in terms of mobile phones. John, are you leading off again?
Yep, sure, thank you. We welcome the opportunity to come and talk to the committee about the recent water bill policy consultation. Consultation closed in August and 61 responses were received. Many of the consultees welcomed the proposals. However, in some aspects there was some opposition expressed, in particular by the construction industry. This proposed legislation is seen as by the Minister as vitally important in securing the provision of water and sewage services for everyone in Northern Ireland. Critically, as you will be aware, the Department's power to pay a subsidy to Northern Ireland Water in lieu of domestic charges expires in March 2016. A new primary legislation needs to be in place to enable the Department to continue to pay the subsidy for the final year of this Assembly's mandate. I also want to highlight the importance of the other proposals that we've consulted on. Members will recall from the briefing in June that there were options for addressing issues with private sewerage infrastructure to help to protect homeowners and to take account of recommendations the committee itself made at the end of 2012 following the inquiry into unadopted roads. Although quite a few consultees objected to the proposed requirements that residential sewers to be connected to the public sewage network should be constructed to a standard that would allow NI Water to adopt them, the Minister believes legislation is necessary to prevent future home buyers from being left with responsibility for incomplete or unsatisfactory private sewage. The legislation also seeks to make developers consider the use of sustainable drainage systems, or SUDs for short, when undertaking residential or non-residential development. There are still some issues to address and more information is still needed, but the legislation would remove the automatic right to connect surface water drainage to the combined sewage system and would represent a strong step forwards. Finally, the Minister is keen to take action on private supply pipes. These pipes are not the responsibility of NI Water, but there are still issues that legislation can help to address in terms of leakage and lead. For example, taking a power to make grants available to support homeowners to repair or replace their private supply pipes. Sure, if you're happy enough, I now hand over to Louise and Eilish to take you through the detail of the presentation.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I appreciate the chance to be able to speak to you about the outcome of the recent water bill consultation. I think you all should have received. Thanks. I think you all should have received the presentation. If it's of help to look on as I go through it. As you'll recall, we briefed the committee at the beginning of June on the proposed consultation, and then that consultation took place over the summer period between June and August. We had quite a substantial response, 61 responses. Quite a few of those came from the construction industry. You'll appreciate that they are quite interested in this area and the impact that it would have on them. We've now had a look at all the responses, all the information has been drawn together, and that has facilitated really a final proposed policy for the Minister to consider, and that's what we now bring to you this morning. Just to recap quickly on the proposals that were within that consultation. The first of them, John has already mentioned, was the subsidy extension. As you'll be aware, the current power of the Department to pay subsidy to Northern Ireland Water expires in March 2016, so that gives us quite a tight deadline to work within and to have legislation in place by. So I have set out in the presentation there the number of responses out of those 61 who commented on each of the more detailed areas. The consultation also considered the option to, rather than, as is currently the practice, issue social and environmental guidance to the utility regulator. Instead, it was proposed to effectively require the regulator to abide by the strategic directions that the Minister would issue. So that was another consultation question that we asked. A third measure that was considered was water resource management and drought planning. Currently, those are two quite substantial pieces of work that Northern Ireland Water has to go through on a regular basis. Water resource management plans need to be made at least every 5 years, drought plans every 3 years, so these periods don't align, and there's quite a lot of red tape involved there. So the Minister proposed to draw those together and make that a smoother process. Private sewerage systems, quite a lot of interest from consultees on that point. You'll already be aware of the issues that have been highlighted in the past with private sewerage infrastructure. Certainly the Committee's inquiry in 2012 into those issues has certainly been the driver for a lot of the proposals that were considered. Surface water drainage and new connections. Whenever officials briefed the committee a couple of weeks ago, I know that certainly you expressed quite a bit of interest in sustainable drainage schemes. So this legislation is proposed to bring those forward. And then finally, one of the areas that also require consideration and were consulted on within this exercise was measures in relation to private supply pipes. Now, that really would be a suite of measures, some of which would require legislation and others which wouldn't require legislation. But because it's all one topic area, we wanted to take the opportunity really to consult on all of them at the one time and consider consultees' views on them. So if I just move through in a bit more detail on each of those policy proposals. The subsidy extension. What the Minister had proposed was to extend the current subsidy paying power by 1 year until March 2017, and also to take an enabling power in the legislation to enable a subsidy to be paid in the future by way of subordinate legislation if necessary. As you'll see from the slides there, the majority of the respondents who responded on that point were in favour of that proposal, and that ultimately would be the Minister's preferred policy option to go ahead and extend the power in that way. Secondly, if we move on to the strategic social and environmental directions option, again, the majority of the respondents were not in favour of making that guidance effectively a mandatory requirement. They certainly expressed some concerns about perhaps interfering with the regulator's independence, and were not keen that that should happen. And so taking on board those consultees' views, the Minister has now identified that we should not proceed to make that guidance a mandatory requirement. The third matter that I wanted to speak to you about is the water resource management plans and drought plans. Really, the Minister's focus here is to reduce red tape, to reduce the bureaucracy, and also the cost element to Northern Ireland Water in having to prepare these two separate plans. The Minister is of the view that that would be money and time and effort much better spent in drawing together two quite similar subject areas into one plan, and to make the process more streamlined and straightforward. And again, that was certainly a view that the public consultation supported. If we can move on now to the private sewerage infrastructure proposals. I suppose you might call these more environmental aspects of the bill, as opposed to perhaps the procedural or governance proposals. Really, there were three individual proposals within the private sewerage infrastructure issue, if you like. The first of them was the proposal to make it a requirement for developers to enter into a sewer adoption agreement if they wanted to connect to the public sewerage network, and that those sewer adoption agreements should also incorporate a bond. At present, there is no requirement for developers to enter into a sewer adoption agreement. Now, that was an issue that the committee, as you'll be aware, had picked up on in the inquiry a couple of years ago, and so we would be seeking, and the Minister certainly would be keen to close that loophole. You'll see from the figures there in the slides that a lot of the consultees were not in favour of this approach. Now, to be honest, a lot of that came from the construction industry. Obviously, it does place more requirements on them to construct private sewers to an adoptable standard. So that's where a lot of the disagreement came from in the consultation response. However, bearing in mind the need to protect homeowners who in the past have been left with unsatisfactory or incomplete private sewerage, the Minister believes that it is more important to introduce this legislation and close the loophole to protect those homeowners in the future. The second of the private sewerage infrastructure proposals is the option to link it again with private streets adoption. Now, in the past, prior to the 2006 Water and Sewerage Services Order, which we currently operate within, it was a requirement for developers to enter into a private streets adoption agreement, which also incorporated sewer bonds and sewer adoption as part of that process. However, having considered the responses from consultees, the Minister feels that it would be more appropriate to go in favour of the original proposal, which was simply to make the sewer adoption agreement a requirement, as opposed to linking it with the private streets adoption process. There are issues there in that if the sewer adoption agreement wasn't entered into, for example, it would delay the private streets adoption, and so homeowners might be in a doubly bad situation in that they wouldn't have their streets adopted within their developments. So the Minister felt that that was too much at this stage. The third aspect of the private sewerage infrastructure proposals are around the level of the sewer bond, which at the moment is 40% for gravity sewers and 50% for pumping stations. The consultation feedback was of quite a high level on this issue. The construction industry certainly had strong views about the current level of sewer bond. As you'll appreciate, they wanted it to be lowered as opposed to be increased. However, really, this issue does need to be looked into, and the Minister is keen that we would look into it and carry out a review of the sewer bond issue. Conscious of time, I'll try to rush through this a bit more quickly for you. So the sewer bond review really would be a process that would sit outside of the legislative process. Primary legislation is not required to affect the level of the sewer bond, and certainly officials would be keen to progress that separate from the bill, and the Minister certainly has supported that approach and has asked us to do that. Moving on to surface water drainage and new connections. The initial proposals had been that for non-residential sites, surface water drainage into the combined sewer system should be absolutely outlawed. And then for residential areas, the proposal was that it should be severely restricted. And this was really in an effort to try to promote sustainable drainage schemes, which we've certainly spoken to the committee about before. So, having considered all of the responses received from consultees, the Minister's preferred policy approach is really to reverse the current presumption which is in favour of allowing a surface water connection into the combined sewer, to reverse that presumption so that developers would then have to consider SUDs. So it's really trying to increase the focus on SUDs and those sustainable drainage systems. Again, quite a few consultees were not in favour of this proposal, but the committee will be aware of the issues that come with the volume of water in unnecessary water, that said, in the combined sewerage system, certainly increasing flood risk, environmental issues, certainly the cost of treating and pumping surface water, which really does not need to be in the combined sewer. So that really was the Minister's thinking behind that proposal. Pardon me. Finally, on the surface water proposals, another option, again, which would be non-legislative, would be to consider using the reasonable cost allowance, which is currently paid for sewer requisitions, again as another means of encouraging sustainable drainage systems. And the Minister's final proposed policy would be to go ahead and to do that. Now, I accept that there are some more information and some more details that will be required on that, and more work will need to be done on that, but certainly that is the proposal at present on the consultation outcome. Finally, if I can move on to the private supply pipes proposals. Again, this was the suite of measures that I mentioned, some of which require legislation and some of which don't. Effectively, the committee might like to think of it in terms of a building up, an escalating scale of measures that could be used to address issues with leakage and the risk of lead in private supply pipes. Excuse me. One of them would be for an information campaign to be run similar to the Don't Wait, Insulate or Bag It and Bin It and so forth, to really educate homeowners and property owners about the risk of, say, lead in private supply pipes, and consultees were in favour of that approach. A further option would be for Northern Ireland Water to be permitted to enter people's private property to replace or repair private supply pipes with the owner's consent. We understand that there may be economies of scale if Northern Ireland Water, for example, was already carrying out works in the street. That it could be possibly done more cheaply or more efficiently if Northern Ireland Water was already there and that homeowners were content to allow them onto their property. The next issue was the possibility of a grant scheme. Now that certainly would require primary legislation for the department to be able to support people to have leaking or lead private supply pipes replaced. Again, consultees were very much in favour of that proposal. A fourth area that the consultation had been carried out on was in relation to the housing market. A couple of parts within that really. One was if someone was selling or leasing a property, it could be introduced as a requirement that they would have to declare whether there was any lead in the private supply pipes, or an alternative and stronger option would have been to make them replace the lead. So the consultation responses have been considered. People tended to be in favour of the declaration, but perhaps understandably not the requirement to replace the supply pipes. However, the Minister has decided that the more appropriate policy would be to consider non-legislative means rather than legislating at this stage to incorporate a requirement for a lead declaration. There are other non-legislative ways that this might be achieved, which would do away with the need for legislation. We don't want to legislate unnecessarily. So the Minister has asked us to proceed on that basis at the moment. finally, I'll draw to a close quickly on this point. The final private supply pipe option was to allow Northern Ireland Water to enter commercial property generally to address burst pipes, really to address the issues of the likes of the freeze thaw a number of years ago. Certainly the Minister is keen that the current legislative powers would be clarified, so that everyone understands what Northern Ireland Water is entitled to do and what they're not, and to strengthen those powers if necessary. So that is a very quick run through the consultation outcome, which I hope has been helpful, and I certainly welcome questions in due course. Pardon me. With the committee's agreement, certainly we would hope to publish the post-consultation report as soon really as we can. And again, certainly if the committee were content, we would be keen to bring the matter to the executive as well. I've set out the timetable at the end of the presentation there. So, as I mentioned, the draftsman will be preparing the bill in the next few months with the committee and the executive's consent, and certainly if all goes to plan, we would hope that the committee stage could happen just in advance of next summer, and hopefully attain royal assent in February of 2016, which is tight for our deadline, but certainly the subsidy extension will require to be in place by the end of March 2016, so we're conscious of time pressures, and thank you for your time, and we're happy to answer any questions that you have at this stage.
Okay, thank you, Louise. That was a very fulsome presentation, and I mean, I think in looking at the slides that we were given this morning, I think we brought these maybe today. It's the first sight we had of them, so it's supposed to be a bit like the papers with no time maybe to read into this one, John, but that's just a wee marker for you. But it's been useful, and I think even once you're going through that, I suppose you can see some questions that may have wanted to ask, but I think even in terms of your presentation, you've answered some of those you went along, which I found useful. The only thing I would say, I think we're very preemptive in terms of we had this discussion about how busy the Minister is, but and as John Dallett had said earlier, that the Department's shutters come down in June, but it's interesting to see you're going to keep us busy from June to October next year. But we will do our best to work with you, of course, but it's interesting you're actually trying to work out our forward work programme for us as well. See, one of the things that interests me in terms of reading through your presentation and listening in terms of your responses, Louise, there has been a problem, and I think this is a real good opportunity to address some of those historic problems that actually we have in Northern Ireland. But I'm slightly, and I just don't get where the Department's coming from in relation to the private streets and not making a prerequisite in terms of the adoption of those sewers. I mean, we've all sorts of problems that comes under DRD with private streets in terms of unadopted roads, and then you cited that the Minister was concerned that it may leave people in a difficult position. Louise, there's people out there in a difficult position today because of the private streets order in terms of they can't get their roads surfaced. The conveyancing isn't flagging that up for those people in those developments. The last thing we want to continue in a process where now there's an opportunity to actually, in terms of the sewage system, to leave them behind as well at a disadvantage, because unfortunately some of the legal people out there seem to be keen to sell houses and get them conveyanced, but people who are actually buying these in the private streets are not actually fully au fait of what they're signing up to. So I think this was a golden opportunity to fix that, but I'm intrigued in terms of your response. Maybe you could speak more to that.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that there are lots of people in Northern Ireland who have suffered at the hands of the issues with lack of adoption. I've certainly read the committee's very full inquiry into the unadopted roads issue, which certainly incorporated a lot of private sewerage issues as well. From a water and sewerage perspective, certainly the priority would be for people not to be living in homes which are not connected to the public sewerage network. So the proposal really is to make sure that any developers who are building residential developments would construct their sewers to an appropriate standard that would allow Northern Ireland Water to adopt them, and that sewer adoption agreement would be protected by a bond of an appropriate level. But in terms of your point on the private streets legislation, prior to 2006, the systems were more aligned. However, 2006 is now quite a long time ago, and the processes have become quite distinct as a result of that. Certainly, there would be the risk if a developer did not enter into a sewer adoption agreement that would delay the adoption of the street if the two systems were again linked. So from a water and sewerage perspective, the Minister's proposal here is to certainly address the sewerage aspects and make sure that any developers who want to connect to the public sewerage system are constructing their sewers to an appropriate standard. They're adopted by Northern Ireland Water, and homeowners are protected.
But is there not an opportunity here, and developers, it's interesting in terms of your responses, and from your presentation, you've indicated that many of the developers are against some of these proposals, and obviously that's ultimately because it's going to cost them more money. But also, whenever developers are designing schemes, they're designing schemes in such a way that a lot of our developments actually have private streets. To my mind, that actually disadvantages homeowners in terms of who buy on private streets if they are not protected. So why, in terms of between the sewage system and even indeed the bond, why, in terms of the sewage, why is that not included as a prerequisite in terms of the private street? I think that's a greater deal of protection. You referred to 2006, but there has been some problem. And the problem could be fixed. And I think now the golden opportunity to actually protect the people in the private street, as opposed to, really what this is saying is, we're going to abandon them further. That's what it says to me.
No, if that's the impression I gave, apologies, it wasn't my intention. Certainly the private streets process continues and is organised and run by colleagues in Transport Northern Ireland. The concern today that we have is around the sewerage, and we want to make sure that people are not stuck with private sewerage, which is not adopted, is not of adoptable standard, and those residents are left with the responsibility for that.
But are you not saying that, so there'll be no bond necessary for a private street, but there is for, or am I getting this in reverse?
No, the private streets process still continues. There's still a bond required for private streets and ultimate roads adoption.
So what's the difference you're drawing between the two?
Well, what I'm saying is there are two separate systems. There's a sewer adoption system and there's a private streets adoption system. Prior to 2006, those were one system rather than two. So the private streets adoption process does and will continue. The proposal had been to link the sewer adoption agreement again with that private streets adoption process, which would mean that ultimately the private street couldn't be adopted if the developer hadn't entered into a sewer adoption agreement. What we're saying is the legislation would require the developer to enter into a sewer adoption agreement anyway. So, there shouldn't be any disbenefit there.
Okay, I misunderstood that, sorry. Deputy Chair.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Louise. There's a lot of information in that to digest over a small period. I think it's to be welcomed because our inquiry back last year or the year before showed up major problems, particularly when the downturn came within the building industry. I'm not surprised that the developers were resistant any major changes here in terms of bonds and that, because I think it's right that the changes need to prevent these problems rising again. But in terms of just a couple of wee remarks, it was in terms of the level of sewer bonds, you said, Louise, that officials would progress separate from the bill. What do you mean? And that's
The level of the sewer bond at the moment is not set out in primary legislation. So the proposal is really to look separately at the level of the sewer bonds and to consider all of the evidence, perhaps benchmark against companies in England and Wales. That there have to be a significant scoping exercise done to look really at how that sewer bond review would be carried out, and then whenever the evidence is collected and considered, then certainly officials will put proposals to the Minister. I can't foresee what the outcome may be. Perhaps the bond level may go up, perhaps it may go down, but we need to look at all of the information that's available. You also mentioned the construction industry. I think it's worthwhile saying, and I probably should have mentioned it in my presentation, that separate from this legislation exercise that we're going with at the moment, we have been meeting on a fairly regular basis with the Construction Employers Federation. Hope that we're establishing a relationship with them. Certainly we're aware of their concerns, and they do have concerns about some of the proposals, but I hope that moving forward we will have more of an open relationship with them. We're certainly engaging with them on issues, and we'll welcome their evidence that would support the sewer bond review, whichever way it may go.
That's fair. And Chair, just you indicated that suds would be cheaper, but without an amount, what the costs, and how much would the cost, and who would maintain them?
Yeah, to be honest, this is one of the areas that I think has really delayed the implementation of SUDs, not only within Northern Ireland, the UK, more widespread than that. Questions over maintenance and responsibility for the schemes. At the last committee meeting that officials attended, I know that you had been quite supportive of the idea of SUDs and had highlighted that these have been on the go for quite a number of years. So they have, however, these issues are still remaining. So certainly what needs to happen is that officials need to look at all the information that's available, certainly look at what's happening in England and Wales, for example, as well, where they're also grappling with similar issues. And we would envisage that the power would be included within the primary legislation to allow for subordinate legislation, which could be made to incorporate more detail as more detail emerges. So I appreciate it's not an ideal position at the moment, but we don't want to miss the opportunity of primary legislation to at least reverse the tide a little in terms of...
And finally, just in terms of the lead pipes, where did the money come for that?
Well, it's a difficult question in the current climate. I can't say at this stage, I'm afraid.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Joe?
Please, just a general question. The response to the consultation, did enough people respond to give you the confidence that this is a true and accurate reflection of opinion? Because it seems to me that in particular responses, developers, for example, have absolutely the upper hand in the kind of responses they have given us. And understandably, their first priority is not, for example, the environment. It's the cost of providing the unit of housing and so on.
Yes.
Is there not disappointment that the response has been so poor?
Well, I suppose perhaps water and sewerage proposals are not headline grabbing, much as officials may like them to be. And I take your point that a lot of the responses came from the construction industry. However, officials and the Minister certainly look at the responses in the round, and yes, we take account of what people have said, but they do have to be weighed against each other. You'll see from, for example, the private sewerage responses, they were quite heavily weighted by the construction industry, and however the Minister's proposal and intention is still to go ahead and to make that sewer adoption agreement a requirement, in spite of the fact that the majority of the respondents, admittedly from the construction industry, were against that proposal.
The Chairperson, I totally respect Louise's extremely honest answer to the question. But is there not a need for some kind of firewall against responses being very badly distorted?
Well,
I think, sure, I mean, we do our best. We go out to consultation. It's up to the general public to respond. I entirely take Mr Dallett's point. There will be some responses which reflect vested interests, and I don't mean that in any negative way.
No, you're exactly right.
Yeah, and you're right on that. But equally, you know, this isn't a vote. Response to consultation, and you know, in the clear light of day, we will recognise that particular interests will seek to protect their own interests, and you have to say, well, that's fine and dandy. I mean, developers might like, for example, bond levels to be low, but the entire point of having a bond is to give some protection, and if it's too low, it defeats the purpose. So I think it's our job to look at the clear light of day and to reflect to ministers our assessment of responses and take account of what are genuine, open, vested interests. You know, I take your point, though, that some people will be quicker to respond because that's their business is affected, whereas the man on the street, I mean, the basic issue about water and sewage is if it works all right, it doesn't excite people. Yeah. It's only when something goes wrong, so they're not going to rush out and respond to this as opposed to some more, you know, upfront issue that affects them day to day.
I think that's a given. Louise, can I, just before I call in Declan, can I bring you back to, I'm a wee bit confused about the private streets. You're citing 5 or more. Is private streets not usually 5 or less?
This is one of the areas, I think, where the two systems differ, because how Transport NI will proceed with road adoption would be different to how Northern Ireland Water would. So there are different considerations if you're dealing with a road or with a sewer. Northern Ireland Water tends not to adopt private sewerage unless the system is serving more than 2 houses or more than 5 if there's a pumping station required. So that's one of the disparities, and also if we were to link the two processes.
So you're saying there are more than 2, but in terms of this consultation you're talking about more than 5? I'm just thinking, I mean, over Northern Ireland's last couple of years, where developers have unfortunately suffered due to recession and went into receivership, there's developments certainly right across Northern Ireland where there's private streets. The private streets normally exist of not more than 5. And I'm just curious, is this capturing them? Because in terms of reading that, we're always talking about more than 5. I'm just...
Yeah, the proposal that the Minister has is keen to proceed with is, as I mentioned, solely in relation to the requirement for the sewer adoption agreement. So I accept that the position is probably different in relation to private streets. I'm not a private streets expert. I'm not within Transport NI, so I can't give you really detailed information about their process.
Well, rather than maybe, sorry, putting you on the spot on that, maybe could you come back to me on that one there, because
surely
that was more the point I was trying to make earlier. A lot of developers, and I think it's a bit like what John, the two Johns have just said, in terms of consultees, it's going to affect them, they're going to respond. But what alarms me slightly again, and that's how developers have been quite cute in the past in terms of how they develop to get that extra unit in. They don't have to bring up to the same standards in terms of the private streets. But this document's talking about 5 or more. I'm concerned about the people in the private streets who are living in 4 properties or 5 properties, you know, so maybe if you could just come back to that one rather than putting you on the spot on that one today.
Yes.
Sorry, Declan, you were next.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to pick up on the same point. Just for clarity, I'm just looking at your final policy, which effectively separates the adoption of private streets from the sewerage adoption. So just to be clear, in that policy there, could you have a situation where the private street or development would be adopted, but the sewer wouldn't be? That could happen. Now, as public representatives, we deal with many horror stories where sewers haven't been adopted, creating public health issues. And so is still a situation effectively where a developer can not complete a development. We've seen where the bond system has failed many households, where perhaps a developer has gone bust, or the cost of completing the development exceeds the bond, so effectively it's left incomplete. And is it still a situation that they can just continue to go on to another development because there's no restraint, even though they haven't completed the previous one?
Well, certainly in terms of how the bond is handled and it's serviced, a lot of the bond providers would control that to a degree in that, for example, I don't have the figures just to mind immediately, but they would be constrained by the amount of bond they have already provided. So once an amount would be released, then the bond provider would allow them to take more on. So it's in their interests to complete the sewer adoption and to have their bonds released. And really, that's the onus is on them to complete them.
But in situations where the cost of completion exceeds the bond, there's nothing prohibiting them from just moving on. Or situations where
I
they've gone
I think we're in danger of actually crossing over to the transport NI issue as opposed to the sewage. And that's where I think there's a confusion in terms of this document as well. Yeah. And I think that's where we would need to, in terms of the joined up approach. But if we're straying into more the bond of the road as opposed to the bond of the sewer.
See one other aspect, I want to just say it. We received a presentation here from NILGA the other week who have been carrying out the audit, and they said they experienced great difficulties with some of the information sets provided. Can you shed any light from your perspective about what might have happened there or how that might be resolved?
I think the difficulty really is that NILGA was in a position where they were trying to draw data from 3 different sources. They had data from Northern Ireland Water, they had data from Transport NI, formerly Road Service, and they had data from councils as well. And I think it was a case of never the twain shall meet. It was quite difficult because they didn't entirely match. So they had quite an exercise, as I understand it, trying to sort out really what the data actually was and what the complete version of it was.
Nice telling, yeah. Okay, Joe.
Yeah, Chairman, I welcome the presentation, and there's a lot of technical details as well as policy issues. In terms of the water policy unit, how big a unit is that? Are you the only person who is a unit, or who's in charge?
In terms of the bill team, it's myself, Eilish, and another colleague who look after the legislation side of things. As a division, we are quite small, something like 20-ish. I would need to count, but it's in that order.
Okay. In relation to the consultation, has it been written submissions only received from these participants, or have you had any informed stakeholder events?
We have held a couple of events. In fact, you'll be aware that the long-term water strategy consultation has recently closed as well. We held an event to discuss the concerns that we believed that the Construction Employers Federation would have. We've met with them a couple of times. We have met with the National House Building Council. We've met with the Confederation of British Industry, and certainly in terms, I know I'm straying from the water bill a bit, but we also held an environmental event with Northern Ireland Environment Link in relation to the strategy. As I say, I'm straying between the two, but it's an overarching policy area and it's difficult to separate them, but yes, we have engaged with stakeholders.
Chair, can I further ask? I appreciate your answer. What about the professional bodies like the Institute of Architects, the Institute of Civil Engineers, the Institute of Chartered Surveyors? Because, professional bodies do have some technical competence and advice they could provide in this regard.
Absolutely. The department holds a central list of stakeholders. The consultation documents are made available to, and certainly what happens quite frequently now is that those documents are made available electronically rather than vast reams of paperwork being sent out. So certainly there was an exercise, and all of those people on our central list were contacted and were provided with a link to the consultation documents.
Lastly, Chairman, in relation to people who purchase a house in a private development, the one thing they can't understand is that within a week of moving in, they get their rich bill. even though no adoption of roads or sewers has taken place. In the Republic, there was a recent court case where no local authority can charge for property tax until there is adoption of the roads and sewers. And I think the same should apply here. It'll quicken the whole pace of the process between DRD and the District Council to make sure.
I think, Joe, it is a problem, but I suppose it's more about land and property services than.
Afraid so.
And I think the sooner they address that issue, the better. And maybe we could get our developments brought up to. So I think that'll be an unfair question for these. Ross, you're next.
Again, thank you for your presentation. John mentioned a firewall, and I suppose when you look at the residents in Coal Island, where the sewer system didn't exist, we have one in Gorton where there's problems at the minute. And I'm surprised people like that didn't actually reply to your consultation to say, well, look, this is what it's like, unless there's actually something done to resolve this. You know, and that, I think, is a major issue. We are aware of those situations, so we should actually have them, you know, within our report, even though those people themselves didn't respond. I think you made the point, yes, people are given the opportunity to respond, but we can't make them respond.
No,
those that are in the public eye are ones that we should be really, really wary of. Two questions I do want to ask. One is in relation to the bonds. Do we know how many bonds we have actually said, okay, we want this bond cashed? And the second one relates to the lead piping. Do we know how much lead piping we're talking about? Is this going to be miles upon miles upon miles? Is actually going to maybe cost us a fortune, I don't know, in the long term?
Yeah, okay. Well, to deal with your first question, first comment really about the problematic sites and people who live there, Northern Ireland Water provided the department with information about sites that were of particular concern, and the consultation document was issued to those developments. There were a few responses coming back, not very many, as you've indicated. However, I think it's also worthwhile pointing out that these proposals are to try to help people in the future, but you still have sites left that are not resolved at the moment. The Minister is very conscious of that and is concerned about it, and the social and environmental guidance which was issued to the utility regulator certainly includes a priority within that guidance, that Northern Ireland Water would carry out a prioritisation and an upgrade of those sites as funds and time allow over the PC15 period. So to draw attention to your second point, which I think was in relation to sewerage, private sewerage. Since the new system came into effect whereby the private streets and the sewer adoption processes were separated, there have actually been 800 sewer adoption agreements entered into since 2007. That's probably worth highlighting in itself, and that legislation currently doesn't actually require developers to enter into those, so those have been effectively voluntarily entered into, if you like.
I interrupted there.
Yes.
The voluntarily agreed to that because their fear was you were going to cash the bond, because had you done that, they're snookered for the future.
Well, there wouldn't have been a bond without the sewer adoption agreement. You can't have one without the other. So yeah, out of those 800, 231 have been successfully adopted. There are 569 that have the agreements in place, but the process itself hasn't been finalised. There's been no final certificate.
Those 516 are under constant review. So sorry, Chair.
Yeah.
And yeah, the last information that we had from Northern Ireland Water was that there are in the order of 18 being considered for enforcement. Sorry, your third point was in relation to lead pipes. It's quite difficult, as you'll appreciate, to gauge the level of lead pipe. Certainly, with within the public network, there's been a long-standing rehabilitation programme that Northern Ireland Water has carried out, and certainly a lot of lead has already been removed from the system. But as you say, a lot of the issue is within the private supply side as opposed to the public network now. A rough guess, and it really is an estimate, it looks as though there are something in the order of 80,000 to 100,000 homes in Northern Ireland, maybe in the order of 1 in 7, that might have properties containing lead pipe at the moment in their private supply pipes. I should also point out that what we're talking about here is the external private supply pipes, not internal plumbing. So that's the nature of the problem at the moment.
One point, Chair.
I can brief.
There's 569 that are still being dealt with, and only 18 were enforced. That would concern me. If we are going to have a bond system, I do believe that if we're going to have it, it has to be effective, and we have to make sure that if it is there, people do try and renege on it, that we just enforce it.
I agree wholeheartedly with you. There's actually something else come out that alarms me as well. There's 80,000 homes in Northern Ireland with lead pipes.
Yep.
Given the linkage to that with some medical conditions, I think the department should be more proactive and should have been more proactive historically, not even most recently. Historically, should be more proactive and actually addressing that. I know I've written to the department on some occasions on my own, and they've been reluctant to do anything. Chris,
Just to clarify, that's 80,000 homes where the pipe from the street to the house is lead,
Yes.
and it's their responsibility as opposed to water service.
well, and I mean, and some of those are social housing, so then
Oh,
we're
yeah,
talking about
yeah.
housing, but it's also on the inside of the properties as well. Chris, you were next.
Thanks, Chair. As it stands, the Northern Ireland Executive subsidises NI water on behalf of households in order to avoid water charges in Northern Ireland. One of the most significant aspects of the bill is to extend that policy until at least March 2017. What is the scale of the current subsidy per year?
260 million.
260 million, okay. And there have been quite a number of comments made in relation to the wastewater infrastructure not being sufficient to meet future requirements expected of it, with the problem most acute in Belfast, and the scale of the investment needed in the region of 2.8 billion across Northern Ireland and 750 million in Belfast. Is the current policy funding model adequate to meet those requirements?
Well, the Executive's policy is not to have domestic water charges. That means that because the subsidy goes to NIW, therefore NIW is classified as an NDPB, and therefore any borrowings or any expenditure counts as PE. Therefore, basically, government capital would have to meet the infrastructure needs under that model at the minute. There are clearly not as much constraints on capital at the minute as there are on resource, but the amount of capital likely to be available is not going to go anywhere near the sort of sums you're talking about. We're looking at indicative capital allocation next year of about 320 odd million. That's to cover the roads on the water side and some other issues. That's about 160, so it's slightly less than even NIW expected over the next price control period. So the current, the way it's worked out at the minute, it's difficult to see how the taxpayer would be able to make available the amount of capital which would be needed to address the significant strategic infrastructure issues in which the committee's been briefed.
What are some of the consequences of not meeting future requirements?
Well, I think we've highlighted there are significant issues, particularly in the Belfast area, and significant risks around infraction. The wider issue, we'd say, is that the inability to modernise the infrastructure could actually prove to be an inhibitor on basic economic development. And again, it's the sort of thing, when water's there, it's all right, and sewage is all right, and people don't think about it in terms of economic development, but if the infrastructure does not keep pace with it, in our view, before too long, it will become an inhibitor on economic development, housing development, industrial development.
Okay, in relation to that particular aspect of the bill, the presentation given today says that the public response was that 15 responses were received. Is that Am I reading that correct?
There were 61 responses received in total for the consultation. Consultees tended to respond on the areas that were of particular interest to them. So that was an area where there were 15 people who commented.
Okay. I think there is a wider challenge in relation to consultation and some of the issues that John and Declan have raised. I don't think it's adequate for the executive, the government departments, or us as MLAs to say that this isn't of interest to the public and you're going to get organisations responding in a more organised way. I think we, and Ross has alluded to as well, I think we have to be proactive in making people in Coal Island or East Belfast or wherever aware of the significant policy proposals that are included in the bill and finding a way to seek their input in relation to it. Perhaps that when the bill is introduced in the Assembly and there are committee stages, we can try and be more proactive. But I think to have 15 responses in relation to something as significant as that for a public departmental consultation is a bit of a concern. But appreciate the presentation and the remarks. Thank you.
I take the point, but when this was not a consultation about whether or not to have water charges. It's in the context the executive's policy is not to have water charging. This is simply to provide the legislative enablement of that.
Chair, yeah, absolutely. And in addition to that, it's also not just about the extension of not charging water. It's about the adoption of sewers. It's about other, issues that are absolutely of relevance to residents across Northern
But I
Ireland.
think the point, Chris, as well is, I think this consultation is no different than many others. People generally do not respond. Now, I don't know how you're supposed to make people respond to something they don't want to get involved in. And I think, to a degree, I hope there's a level of trust in people in terms of actually taking that forward. But certainly, I've been here since 2007, seen many consultation processes, but the responses to many of them have been pretty poor.
Chair,
But to finish my point, if you take local government, where we're talking about the transfer of car parks, and there's only 6 out of the 11 councils where they're going to directly be affected, it took time to respond. It says more about them than it actually said about the wider public, because again, they've entrusted people to actually make decisions on their behalf.
I think it's a communications issue, though. I think, when how are we informing the public about the opportunity to respond to the consultation? What way are we packaging it? Are we packaging it as responding to, the water bill X, Y, Z, or are we getting the information out here that this is about the adoption of sewers? It's about the things that actually are of interest to them, and it's not easy. But I think government does need to get a wee bit more creative about how it involves people in decision-making processes like this.
But I reckon if you come out with one personal one, if you want to do a consultation in terms of introducing water charges, I reckon you'll get a fair few responses, possibly more than the 15
Current news items would suggest that there is a large degree of interest in that issue. Yes.
Yeah.
And on its head bait.
And on your head base, we'll leave that one to you and your party.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Chair. And I apologise for missing a small part of the presentation. I'm asking this question more in hope than expectation, because it affects just a very small number of cases. In terms of Proposal 6.5, the right of entry recommendation there are, as I say, in a very small number of cases, still a hiatus over issues in high water access and the compensation thereof. And I know that's we are almost an LPS an issue there. But was there any consideration given to those small number of cases where there are still outstanding compensation issues? No.
In a word, no, I'm afraid there wasn't. Really, the idea behind the proposal was to try to clarify and confirm what the existing powers are for the future. If there are compensation issues outstanding, I'm afraid I don't have the detail on them. I'll be able to come back to you if necessary.
Thank you. Thank you, John, Eilish, and Louise, for the presentation.
Chair, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Members, swiftly move on to agenda item number 6. a departmental briefing on the blue badge scheme.
Chair, can I just ask a quick question? Is the presentation available in electronic copy?
We'll get it, yeah.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
So refer members to page 29 in their pack. And can I welcome David Miller and David Scott to the table? And others.
Chair, can I declare an interest as a blue badge holder?
Okay. Thanks, David. I take it you're leading off.
Yep.
I'm sure it will be fairly brief.
Try and keep it.
You're probably going to explain to us how, and I think one of the things maybe highlighted this is how an individual with one arm gets refused for a blue badge. Indeed, my own constituency, I had a man who has a prosthetic leg, actually had difficulties actually getting a blue badge as well. So maybe you're going to talk us through that. I'm sure not specific cases, but how you arrive at these decisions, or your department.
Yeah. With me today is David Scott. David's the head of the Blue Badge unit down in Enniskillen. So hopefully between the two of us we'll be able to answer any questions that the members may have. We understand the committee have some concerns about the process and criteria on which blue badges are issued. And that's arising from the recent case, as you point out, Mr. Chairman, which was widely covered in the media, which was about the refusal of an application of a blue badge to a lady who had only the use of one arm. We could take a few moments just to remind members of the legal description of a disabled a disabled person to whom a badge may be issued, and the statutory grounds for refusing the issue of a badge. Now, the Blue Badge Disabled Persons Parking Scheme was introduced under Section 21 of the Chronically Sick and Disabled Persons Act 1978, and the Disabled Persons Badges for Motor Vehicles Regulations NI 1993 governs the Blue Badge Scheme in Northern Ireland, and it mirrors the schemes operating in England, Scotland and Wales. Now, the aim of the scheme is to help disabled people with severe mobility problems to access goods and services by allowing them to park close to their destination. And the scheme is open to eligible disabled people, irrespective of where they are travelling as a driver or passenger. The scheme operates and provides a national range of on-street parking concessions to blue badge holders. It allows them to park without charge or time limit in otherwise restricted on-street parking environments, and allows them to park in double yellow lines for up to 3 hours unless there's a loading bay in place. But turning to the specific case, Regulation 4 of the Disabled Person Regulation sets out the descriptions of the disabled persons to whom a badge can be issued. And we provided the committee with a copy of Regulation 4 for ease of reference, and also Regulation 7, which is a grounds for refusal of a badge. But with regard to dealing with applications for blue badges with people with a disability of one arm, Regulation 4.2 states clearly that where a person drives a vehicle regularly, has a severe disability in both arms, and is unable to operate or has considerable difficulty in operating all or some types of parking meter, then they are entitled to a blue badge. The Department of Transport issues guidance to all local authorities in assessing people for a blue badge, including guidance on assessing people with severe disability in their arms. And just if I could refer to a couple of lines from that guidance. When making an assessment under this criteria, local authorities will need to consider whether the applicant meets all of the following: regularly drives an adapted or non-adapted vehicle, has a severe disability in both arms, and is unable to operate or has considerable difficulty in operating all or some types of parking meter. In no circumstances should anyone who does not satisfy all three of the conditions set out above receive a badge. In particular, a badge should not be issued to a person who has difficulty carrying parcels, shopping, or other heavy objects such as luggage. So the badge is about mobility, it's not about the ability to carry bags. So any application from a blue badge from a person with one arm is unlikely to be successful if that person is mobile, is able to use a parking machine. If their disability in their one arm is such, and their one good arm is such that they can't operate a parking ticket machine and obviously pay for their parking, then they would be awarded a badge. When someone applies for a blue badge and is refused, in the refusal letter they're advised the right to seek reassessment. which should normally be supported by further medical evidence. And if it is assessed and refused again, then the second refusal letter offers the appeal process, where if the applicant wishes, the case can be referred to the head of the Blue Badge Unit, which is David here, to review the case and the decision made. In this particular recent case that was covered by the media, the lady did not appeal the initial decision to refuse the badge. But David did hear about the case on the radio on the way into work, was able to track down the name of the lady and was able to review the application. And indeed, the Minister later on that day asked for the same day for the case to be reviewed. David was able to review the application, and looking at the supporting documentation, there was enough evidence that David felt to support the award of the badge, and the badge was issued immediately. Now, Mr Chairman, in conclusion, I wish to assure the committee that our Blue Badge Unit does properly apply the statutory criteria for the issue of blue badges, which is what the disability groups like Disability Action and MTAC expect us and demand us to do. Because to do otherwise would defeat the purpose of the blue badge, because there would be so many badges out there that people with blue badges wouldn't be able to have enough spaces to park. There is an appeal process in place for applicants who are not happy with the initial decision of refusal. And this appeal system should pick up any errors made by the original decision maker if that happens. Mr Chair, that's how I take any questions.
Thanks for that, David. I suppose one of the things that strikes me, and I don't know the specific case other than what everybody has heard in the media, and I suppose and how sometimes the media characterise things, and will have used the fact that necessarily this woman has only one arm. But maybe, and should write it maybe more the other David, if that's appropriate. So this woman doesn't appeal the case, but the department decides to appeal it themselves. So there's no new evidence, but it seems clear now that the supporting documentation that actually was made with the original application, given by your presentation, that the documentation and supporting evidence was already there whenever the wrong decision was made. Because in the absence of an appeal, and if David Scott was listening to the radio and went in and searched to find out who this woman was, looks at that application and finds the supporting documentation, rather than the department absolving themselves from blame in this case, they have obviously got it wrong. So maybe, David, if you want to respond.
Right. Well, basically, I would say I read the accompanying letter, and I think if the department was in error, I don't think reading the letter, I think where they only could be faulted is that they possibly it could have been referred. It could have been referred to the doctor.
Sorry,
it could have been referred. We can refer cases if they're in doubt. The department can refer them for a doctor's opinion.
Right.
In this case, this wasn't done. Now, I probably, when I did read the case and reading through the lines, there's very few people, I have to say, there's only 12 people, I think, in Northern Ireland actually have qualified on this procedure. There's very few people out there that qualify on it. Now, a lot of people possibly this with one arm may have qualified under the high rate of DLA. Mm-hmm. Those people would have been picked up automatically now. So basically, but when I did read the letter, and it was basically the way it was written, I was satisfied that the person had a disability in the other arm.
So my point, David, is nothing has changed. There's no new evidence. We've had a minister's intervention in the back of a media outlet raising the concern, but it's already been through your department. They declined it on the basis of no new information, on the basis of no additional referral to a GP or requesting additional information. You've had a change of mind.
Yes, that's right.
Yes, I would say, yeah.
And what I would say to you, Chairman, is, David's unit processes over 42,000 applications last year. It's a human process. Decision makers look at those applications, and from time to time there will be mistakes.
And I appreciate the department come and say we got it wrong, because there may be 40-odd thousand applications.
Yeah.
And in David Scott's analysis of this particular case, there is less than 10 people in Northern Ireland in an unfortunate position where they've lost the ability of one arm. So this is a case
They've
unique
got
on its
the
own.
badge.
On the badge, sorry, on the
They've
badge.
got a
This is
water
a unique
badge.
case on its own. This is not like the other 39,990 cases. So if the department would just put their hands up and say, they got it wrong, I mean, to my mind, it's dealt with. It is alarming that people have to fail to go in terms of going to the lengths of going to the media to highlight a situation like this. Personally, I accept that there's a very small number, and I accept that even looking at the criteria, and I think everybody around this table knows quite a few people who have blue badges, and most of them will probably come under the higher rate DLA and mobility.
Yeah.
But this was a unique case. This was an individual with a very small number of similar individuals who wasn't being granted. But David, on the basis of no new information, you had change of mind,
Yes.
which indicates to me that the department got it wrong.
And, Mr Chairman, that's what we're saying to you, because there was an error of judgment. The case was reviewed within a day. We issued the badge. We apologised. The Minister actually apologised the next day as well.
Okay.
So, hands up, we did this one case, yes, there was an error of judgment, but we did apply the criteria sympathetically when we did review it again. Because, as David has said, we could have sent the lady for a medical review, but we didn't. We applied it sympathetically with the information that we had,
So,
and we awarded the badge.
are you saying, David, you're not sympathetic every time?
Sorry?
Are you saying you're not sympathetic every time?
We try to be as sympathetic as we can every time.
According to the criteria.
Yeah.
But there is a criteria there, and we're statutorily required by
And obviously the woman has met the criteria.
Yeah.
So going forward, was there a consultation, or has there been a review of the policy, or is there any plans to review the policy on the foot of this?
Well, on the foot of this, what we've done, I've spoke to colleagues over in England, Scotland and Wales to see if they have come across the same issue. They have gone through the consultation 2012-2013 on amending the criteria of the blue badge, the automatic criteria of the blue badge, moving from disability, higher rate of disability living allowance to the award of the blue badge under PIP, personal independence payments, and they've set their criteria, and they're operating under, they have the welfare reform in, so they're operating that now. But it's all part of their consultations. They never received any request for any amendments to the criteria for this particular criteria, for this particular aspect of disability. Ourselves, we carried out our consultation middle of summer. Mainly it was focused again trying to set the criteria for moving from disability living allowance to higher rate mobility of disability living allowance to the criteria under PIP whenever that comes in. We didn't receive any responses asking for any further amendments to the criteria for the blue badge. We had pre-consultation meetings with MTAC and Disability Action, and indeed in this particular case the lady from Disability Action was on the radio afterwards saying that basically the badge is about mobility, it's not about being able to carry bags, and she certainly wasn't, or those groups haven't certainly been pressing us for any changes.
Yeah. No, so in terms of the consultation you've cited that has been done, when will the committee get sight of the consultation?
Well, if you remember, Chair, the main thrust of that consultation was try to establish the criteria for the award of the blue badge under the new PIP, personal independence, when it comes in. And unfortunately, welfare reform hasn't been sorted out here. And our difficulty is, that's once starting to slip past. We're now at the stage, or we think we're at the stage, that we have to park that bit and try to move forward for the other 4 or 5 things that we consulted on to try and move work forward in them. And we have produced a consultation report which we have submitted to the Minister. So hopefully that...
When was that?
2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago. So hopefully once the Minister clears that, the intention then is to present that to the committee, and then we'll arrange a date to come up and
I mean, I'm aware you're
speak to
public
that.
gallery in the last presentation we had, and I know one of the members was his interest in one element of that consultation process, and there were very few respondents. Whilst that was on about private sewers, there was an element in that. But in terms of the water charging, so the genesis of that document was not about water charging, it was about sewage and the adoption of sewers. But we've seen that, and we've seen that even there's a very few number of respondents to that particular consultation. So whether this is in terms of welfare reform, I think it would have been good that the committee could have got a flavour of one opinion, because, I mean, whilst we're all very defensive of this individual who highlighted this in the media, there's also criticism of the Blue Badge scheme. I've been interested, I mean, I certainly would be interested in seeing some of the consultation responses actually to see if those criticisms are coming across also. So,
Well, prior to going out to consultation, we did come up and do a presentation to the committee.
all right, okay,
So,
I'll maybe can I get through with that? Yeah, okay. Well, obviously that was before my time. Has any other members any questions in relation to the consultation or this particular case? Members content? Sorry, Joel.
I'd just like to say that generally my experience has been, you know, that the Blue Badge system generally gets the balance right in terms of making sure that the right people get the blue badges. And I think that's important. And, you know, while I accept the chairman's concern that there is abuse of the system, and we do know that, at the same time, I think it is important that you err on the side of the applicant. If there's evidence there, for example, only one arm, then they should get the thing.
Well, that's not actually what they're saying, John. I mean, maybe if you look in your pack, the one arm doesn't automatically assume they get it. I think one of the ones that does assume the automatic would be the high rate mobility.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think as the gentleman have said, it's geared more for mobility than it is other physical disabilities. So
it's geared, sorry, Chairman.
To be honest, my office deals more with traffic wardens going around and getting the wrong side up, or falling off the window. Puts, you know, people who are not in good health to endless, and I just don't understand it. If there was a little bit of flexibility at that end, I think it would enhance the Blue Badge scheme.
So you were going to say something there, David? No?
You know, it was just, it's just to clarify, yes, it is about mobility, but it is also about the person's ability to pay for their parking. So if they can't operate a machine, they can, you know, I have a friend who has only one arm but lost in a farming accident, but is, you know, is very mobile and can do everything with his other arm. But there are people out there who, you know, will come forward who can't operate the machine.
Use my position. Why on earth are people with blue badges expected to pay anyway?
They're not. That's the purpose of having it.
But in a car park, they do have to pay.
Yeah, well, that was part of our consultation that we've gone out. So
all right.
Okay, members content.
Right to sleep.
We'll leave it there. Okay. Thank you, David. David.
Thank you.
Agenda item number 9, EU matters. Can I refer members to page number 298. Can I inform members that they have been provided with 2 papers in relation to EU matters. Basically, just these papers to be noted. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Agenda item number 10, supporting legislation not subject to assembly procedure. Refer members page 313 in their pack, and ask members to note that the compulsory right or left-hand turn Belfast Order, Northern Ireland 2014. Okay. Any other business?
Yeah.
No?
Chairman, just on that issue about the water bill policy, obviously the Rees is involved in the consultations. I'm not so sure that they have had a meaningful stakeholder event. And, you know, it's something from another committee had a stakeholder event to inform us in relation to the reservoirs bill, and certainly enlightened us and made us be in a better position to comment on the policy.
I think going forward, Joe, I think there's still been an opportunity for us to do that once the Parliament start the process.
That's okay.
You know, I mean, they're indicating in terms of that paper today, they're indicating, as I did indicate, they're actually laying out our work programme for us, but they're suggesting that we're going to start this piece of work in June.
Okay.
But provided it goes through the executive, there's nothing to prevent us to starting a bit of priority work before that.
That's okay.
Should it be like in a round table form or whatever, there's nothing to prevent that, and I take your point, I think it's useful.
Thanks.
So members, if everyone's content, the date and the time, the next meeting will be Wednesday the 12th of November at 10 AM in room 21 Parliament Buildings. Declare the meeting closed.